it going? I'm back for another one. I hope you guys are ready for another ghost story. Today, I'm going to be talking about Miss Molly's Hotel in Fort Worth, Texas. So I'm starting off with my e.l.f. Poreless Primer. In the early 1900s, Fort Worth was just booming. Thanks to low cattle prices, the cattle trade was just off the chain, and lots of guys were coming from near and far to trade cattle, whether they were cowboys or proprietors or whatever they had to do with the cattle trade back in the early 1900s at the turn of the century. Moving on to NYX's Can't Stop, Won't Stop in Vanilla, and I'm mixing this in with some CeraVe Daily Moisturizing Lotion so that my dry ass skin doesn't look flaky and gross. So thanks to the stockyards, which is a massive historic section of Fort Worth, and the booming cattle trade, Fort Worth just grew exponentially. By 1910, a town that was still, for all intents and purposes, mired in what was the Wild West, had 37 saloons, something like 7 barber shops, lots of market space, and various other retailers and nightlife. On top of all of that, Fort Worth also brought the rodeo to town. So I think it's pretty fair to say that if you were looking for something to do, Fort Worth in the early 1900s offered plenty of it. At the time, people moving across country from the eastern part of the country to California, or from the Midwest to California, the cattle boom, and people coming into town for entertainment, nightlife, the rodeo. The one thing that Fort Worth was missing was an actual proper hotel or boarding house, whatever you want to call it. I mean, you've got all these cowboys coming in and wranglers and whatnot, but none of them have a place to stay. So in 1910, the town went and built the very first hotel. Now, this was a proper hotel. It served cowboys, families, people traveling through, people who were visiting the town, etc., etc. But let's not fool ourselves into thinking that it was all roses, because in 1910, the early 19-teens, there were lots of illnesses that people just weren't equipped to deal with. This is the Winky Lux Diamond Powder Foundation in Light, and clearly I use it all the time because it's got all my fingerprints on it and stuff. So a lot of the travelers that came into the hotel often were carrying some diseases with them. Tuberculosis being one of the key diseases. Some folks back in the day used to call tuberculosis consumption, and there's a reason for that I never knew until just recently. And the reason being is because TB kind of eats you from the inside out. So a lot of people who were afflicted with tuberculosis lost a whole bunch of weight and got really sick and skinny, and so they called it consumption. And I never knew that until just recently, and I thought I would share that with you. So anywho, the early days of this hotel in Fort Worth saw some death right off the bat because of the people who were coming in and staying, who were traveling with diseases that just didn't have a lot of options for curing in the early 1900s. In the 1920s, the hotel stopped operating as a hotel or a boarding house, and the owners decided to change it into what was then called the Oasis, a bar that was operating during Prohibition. Well, how the hell does a bar operate during Prohibition, you ask? Well, apparently, the Oasis had a well-known speakeasy inside, and at the time, the people who were running Fort Worth didn't really care to run it out of town. And the hard fact is that during Prohibition, who you knew kind of mattered. So if the guys in government were willing to look the other way, the Oasis stayed open. So I'm going to be using the Profusion Wanderlust palette. In this order, I am going to be using Majesty, Hypnotic, Jade, and Illusion. Majesty, Hypnotic, Jade, and Illusion. So once we get past the era of Prohibition, the Oasis closes and changes hands yet again, and it becomes a bordello. Now, being a bordello, it sees all kinds of traffic, from cowboys to elite men who work in the political arena to some of your less attractive, more seedy people from off the street. Since it's operating in the 1940s or so, there are less options for safety for the women who are working in the bordello, and some of them end up having children. Some of those children, unfortunately, don't survive due to childhood illness and things like that. And some of the women themselves come down with illnesses and don't survive their stay at the bordello. There are also clientele there who have less than stellar ideas about women's safety, who end up murdering some of the women who are offering their services. The bordello stays open until about 1950-ish, when Fort Worth decides it's had enough of the bordello business and it's forced to close. So it ends up in the hands of various real estate agents, and sometime in the 80s, a woman named Molly, Miss Molly, ends up buying the place, renovating it, and turning it into Miss Molly's Hotel, where she opens it up, has themed bedrooms, many of them named after former proprietors or people that lived there, and it now is what it is today. Of course, what it is today is one of Texas's most haunted places. Miss Molly, as well as pretty much every guest that's ever stayed there, claims that the entire place is haunted by previous tenants, people that lived there, etc., etc. This includes a ghost named Jake, who Miss Molly saw one of her very first weeks of owning the hotel. Jake apparently is a cowboy who makes his way all over the stockyards of Fort Worth. He is dressed in a duster, which is a long leather type coat, and wears a cowboy hat. And at Miss Molly's, she says you can see him between 1 and 3 in the afternoon or 1 and 3 in the morning. And her first encounter with him was in the hallway, where she saw him walk down the hall, disappear into a room where the door was open. The door closed behind him, and when she went to follow him in, because she was in the hotel alone, he was gone, but all the lights that were off in the room were suddenly on. Now, Jake apparently makes appearances at different saloons and businesses all over the stockyard area of Fort Worth. Miss Josie, the madam during the hotel's former bordello days, apparently has her own bedroom that was actually hers during her time as the madam, and she appears to guests as an apparition. Now, she shows up in her actual form. You can either see through her or you can't, but she generally stands or sits at the end of the bed and just gazes upon her guests, which I think is kind of creepy. I don't know if I'd want her staring at me in the middle of the night. Is she sizing you up? Isn't she? Does she expect you to pay? I don't know. There also appears to be the spirit of an 8 or 9-ish little girl who was thought to be the daughter of one of the working girls / dancers that lived in the bordello days at the hotel. She was actually recorded on EMF very clearly saying, "I hate dancing," which is funny because her mom was a dancer and apparently she had had enough of. Miss Molly's accounts talk about a lot of really specific people that show up inside the hotel in very specific rooms, but there are also a lot of just random happenings that occur there. There are plenty of accounts of toilets flushing on their own, lights going on and off on their own. People will place cell phones next to the bed on the end table and wake up the next morning to find them across the room on the dresser. General poltergeist / haunting experiences that happen in a lot of situations like this. Both the lip liner and pencil are STFU, shut the fuck up, by NYX. I think the very best story I heard come out of Miss Molly's was the very generous spirit who lives there, who likes to place coins on the pillows of the guest rooms. He or she generally does this right after a maid has come in and cleaned the room, which apparently was completely and totally unsettling. One particular maid kept coming in to clean the rooms, leaving, and then she would turn around to retrieve something from inside the room, only to find a coin gently placed on a pillow or the nightstand. And it had happened so frequently that one day she decided she couldn't take any more, threw her hands up, and quit because that was At any rate, Miss Molly's, one of the most haunted places in Texas. She's had tons of paranormal investigators come in. They found slews of evidence pointing to true hauntings. So if you're ever in the Fort Worth area, maybe it would be a good place to check out. Now me and my Ooh David shirt are going to go put some eyelashes on, and we'll be right back with your final look. All right, guys, here you have it. This is our final look. You like it? I'm loving it. Anyway, you guys, I hope you had fun. Thanks for coming back to see me. Remember to always love yourselves, always be a unicorn, and we'll see you next time. Bye!